the difference between people who are successful and not are those who are successful seem to know from age of 7 or 8, maybe older, they're very in tune with what they love. I compare it to a voice inside their head. Not literally a voice, but it's something saying, you really are drawn to this subject. And they hear it throughout their lives. For me, it was writing and books since I was a kid. Anytime I deviated from that love and went into something else, I just was so unhappy. I knew that I wasn't doing the right thing. And so it's just like this voice that keeps drawing you back to what you really, really love. Some of the most important discoveries, inventions, and innovations within a field come from people who are trained in a much different field and who have an outsider's approach. Louis Pasteur was a classic example of this. He was trained as a chemist and mineralogist, so he brought a much different way of thinking to the subject of medicine and germs, a method that was infinitely more creative. Albert Einstein was a complete outsider. His two most important discoveries came when he was working at the Swiss Patent Office. Google itself exemplifies this idea. It is perhaps the most successful business on the planet, founded by two men who are relatively complete outsiders to business and who therefore structured and directed their company in a very novel and creative fashion. I could go on and on and on with this list, including many great artists. There are two important reasons why outsiders generally have a creative advantage. First, they are less steeped in and burdened by the conventions of the field that they are attacking. They ask a different set of questions. They approach problems from unconventional angles. And second, they are often trained in totally unrelated fields and so can make interesting and creative connections between two very different forms of thinking, like science and business, or chemistry and medicine, or engineering and design. Now, we can't all consciously follow such a path, but even within the careers that we're pursuing, we can train ourselves to think like outsiders and help loosen up the mind in the process. Use active imagination is deceptively simple. Often what separates creative from conventional thinkers is that they simply search wider. They use their minds to generate possibilities that others don't think of, and then they work to verify what they came up with. We saw a classic example of this with Pasteur. Another great example is with Henry Ford. Early on in his career, in the earliest years of what would later become the Ford Motor Company, Ford was anxious to speed up production of cars. He saw the automobile as the ultimate consumer product, but in order for it to become that, he had to greatly increase the production rate in his factory. So he spent a couple days looking at his employees on the factory floor and trying to imagine how he could get them to move faster from car to car. Suddenly one day he imagined something completely different. He imagined the men standing still and the cars coming to them. He didn't know what that really meant, but he decided to try it out, and lo and behold, it increased productivity by such an incredible exponential rate that it could now become the consumer product that he envisioned. Things like antibodies or assembly lines, they seem so obvious to us now, but they are never obvious in the present, and they involve an incredible leap of what I call active imagination. The difference between regular and active imagination is that the latter is used consciously to reach very, very practical results. It's not imagination for coming up with wild things. It's imagination used for very practical results. Think of the active imagination as a kind of creative muscle that you're developing. First, within the loose constraints of what you're working on, you open your mind up you give it complete free rein. You entertain almost every possibility that you could imagine or visualize. You engage in what Charles Darwin calls fool's experiments. This is the fun, play part of serious play. You use notebooks, sketches, diagrams, models, prototypes to help externalize the products of your imagination. Once you have gone through this, you now enter the second serious part of the process. First, you choose one or few of the more promising possibilities that were generated by your imagination, and now you actively work to test, verify, or confirm it. This might entail launching a beta version on the public. Once you have feedback, you now go back into the first part of the process in a shortened form, using your imagination to perhaps take what you have into an even better and higher form, circling constantly through this process in shorter and shorter cycles until you've got something that's both incredibly imaginative and incredibly realistic and practical. By developing this, by going through this over and over and over again, you will develop your imagination into an incredibly powerful creative muscle. I want you to get over this notion that I find so annoying that so many people have, that success and power in life is dependent on something like genetics. Like some people are born with a larger brain, or they have wealthy parents who are able to send them to the right school, or it's all a matter of luck. What really makes people successful and powerful in life, and it's not just me saying this, I read hundreds of books on the subject, what makes people successful is their degree of motivation. Okay, I could repeat it 100 times, but it's true every time I say it. When you are motivated, when you feel yourself emotionally engaged in the subject, you learn faster. You learn what could take somebody 10 years to learn, you can learn in 2 years. When you feel emotionally engaged with something, you're able to push past all the obstacles. The sense that it's genetics or the size of our brain or our parents' money, you can't control any of that, obviously. And they can become kind of crutches for some people. But the amount of motivation you feel, the emotional connection you have to what you're studying or doing, that is something within your control. That is something you can choose to take. And it is, you're going to find people giving you all kinds of great advice about your careers, about where you should go, for your MBA, etc. But if there's one piece of advice that I think is more important than that, it is this idea of following these natural inclinations and creating your own career path and finding a way to engage the deepest motivating parts of your psyche. You learn to embrace uncertainty and chaos. Life is inherently chaotic and it doesn't fit into our tidy formulas. Not only does this not make you anxious, but you find chaos and uncertainty deeply exciting and stimulating. Slowly adopting this as an overall philosophy will naturally loosen the mind up and give it greater creative flow. You will naturally consider more options and possibilities. The brain evolved over the course of millions of years. So I try to make the point that what Da Vinci was going through, the process is a template there, and it's the same because our brains haven't really changed in an evolutionary sense in 400 or 500 years. On the other hand, the circumstances are different, and people now live in a world where there's many more distractions, so it's harder to do that kind of focus that I was mentioning. So in some ways it's a little bit harder, and the people that I've interviewed are really good at shutting out all of the distractions of the world. That's sort of what separates them. Every single one of them. Paul Graham, you know Paul Graham? Paul doesn't have a smartphone. He doesn't spend time on the internet. He's extremely focused. The woman Yoki Matsuoka, she does all of her writing with a pen and paper. She's not sitting there day in and day out on the computer checking her Facebook or Twitter page or whatever. I could go through all of them that way. Steve Jobs is sort of the ultimate icon of mastery of our era. And he said the only thing that's differentiated me from everyone else was my level of focus. I could take a problem and I could focus on it and burrow into it, and everybody else was so distracted. He knew how to close his door, get away from his wife, his kids, everyone, and just focus. So all of these people have to overcome the intense distractions in our world, and they're able to do it. On the other hand, what you can get with a click on the internet, with a Google search, compared to what Da Vinci had to do, or a scientist in the 19th or 20th century, is absolutely astounding. So what you have at your fingertips, the knowledge, the things that you can connect and learn about, the potential for learning skills is out of this world. So if you're able to overcome the distracting elements that are, my girlfriend and I compare it to, if you ever watch a basketball game and you see the opposing team shooting a free throw, and everyone behind him, the stands are all going like this with those big, trying to distract him. There's like hundreds of people. That's what the world is like now. You've got thousands of people waving those things. You've got so many distractions. If you're able to overcome that and be a person that can focus, you have this like wealth of information and knowledge and ability to acquire skills that nobody 100 years ago, 20 years ago could dream about.